Today then, the main part of today, I want to go through those 7 steps of the teaching progression, and I want to apply them to primary. I want to lower them into primary. I want to look at them from the primary's perspective. Totally different. Last hour with the intermediate students, I did the same thing, and we are on totally different views because we're at a different stage in the students' learning, a different stage in their maturity, and so forth. Now, I gave you those 7 steps of the teaching progression. My idea was for you to use them. And by looking at your lessons, you didn't. So let's now apply them. We began with our terminology. There they are again. Terminology, facts, concept, procedure, expansion, problem areas, application. Right? Think about that list. How do we apply that to first graders? Let's just think about first and second primarily, especially the first graders. And I use the word scratch, and I'm using it on purpose. You do have to teach them math from scratch. And in my mind, that's very challenging. Okay, because many of the things you can do your primary math without thinking. And so that makes it harder to teach. So that means you have to think through things deliberately. All right, so think about the terminology, facts, concept, procedure, expansion, problem areas, application. Which one of those does not apply very much in primary math? What do you think? Exactly, and that's exactly where I was going with my thought. If you look at our 7 steps of the teaching progression, the first thing I want to point out is which one applies the least, and that is expansion. Expansion is where you start taking the procedures they already know. Well, guess what? They don't know very many. Okay? And you add more digits, you add more add-ins, you make harder borrowing, you add more factors, more numbers in your multiplication. Well, they don't even do long division, do they? So of those 7, expansion is the least applicable to primary math. Which one is the most applicable? You're setting the foundation of their arithmetic knowledge. What do you think?
Facts.
No. Concept. So concept, primary math is concept driven. You have to start from scratch. And where are you going to start? I'm going to go through these points in more detail in a minute, but I just want you to think about the fact that I have to adjust my teaching for primary, probably more than I have to adjust it for intermediate. Jessica said facts, and I'm putting that probably about 3, maybe 4. Do they know any math facts? See, that's why it's kind of nice to teach the upper grades. They have a foundation already instead of you trying to dig out and build a foundation. So concept is probably the most applicable, the most important, and the thing you're going to be striving for the most. You are starting from scratch. You don't have the foundation. You're digging it and laying it. So primary grades are important. Okay, if you don't have a foundation of facts, then you struggle all the time when you're in 5th grade and the teacher's doing all this expansion. And what we just talked about in intermediate math is that we're doing a lot of expansion. We're doing a lot of procedures. But there is a balance. In intermediate, you're going to want to they already know the procedures, they're comfortable with it, then we can do the concepts. Here we're on the other end of that spectrum. They don't know either concept or procedure. And what Jessica said, they don't know the facts. So facts would be around 3rd or 4th in priority. What about terminology? Do they have a math vocabulary? Now, I told the intermediate students that they are going to be concentrating on building math vocabulary and building math facts and expanding into algebra facts and geometry facts, taking the opportunity to teach some of the upper terminology. That's not going to be the case. You're at the entire other end of the spectrum. What about problem areas? That's going to be very important because you're going to be having all kinds of problem areas. I was really surprised at the problem areas I had. I only taught second semester, second grade math because we had a vacancy. And I had the bright idea that I'm teaching primary math in college. I need to teach primary math in the academy a little bit. And it opened my eyes. A lot was problem areas. They did some things that I couldn't even first figure out where they got their answer. And then when I finally figured it out, I think, why in the world would they do that? I also had struggles teaching them with clocks. All right, little hand, big hand, and I had to watch my terminology and so forth. So you've got to be very aware of problem areas as well. Okay, let's begin then with terminology, and let's be specific. How do we approach primary terminology? Remember, terminology involves your vocabulary. It involves the terms and definitions and words that you're going to use when teaching each of your concept. But now you're teaching at a very low level. Your students have a very limited vocabulary. Then it's going to be a very wide range of vocabularies in your first grade concept classroom. What did we say about terminology? Use it. Does that change with primary? No. So the first thing I want to say about primary terminology, aside from the review that we've already done, the first thing I want to say about terminology is the fact that terminology is critical. I told the intermediate students that you are going to build their math vocabulary. Primary, you are going to start their math vocabulary. So first of all, terminology is critical because you will be starting their math foundation. You will be not building on a foundation. You're going to have to start from scratch with all of your terminology. Second thing with terminology is be aware of the maturity of primary students. They have not only limited math vocabulary, they also have a limited regular vocabulary. And by maturity, you got to think about the fact that they will take things, there's two things about their maturity. The first thing is they will take things literally. And the second thing is they tend to remember the first things best. I've had primary teachers tell me that they introduced something in a kind of the wrong way, and it gave the students the wrong impression. And guess what? They seem to remember that wrong impression a whole lot better than when she went back and corrected it. So think about this. You're not going to be able to go back and correct mistakes, because their minds they're little sponges and they're taking in everything that you're saying. And then if you make the wrong impression, it's going to be harder for you to undo a wrong impression in a first grader than in an older student because of their maturity. So be aware of the students' immaturity, of where their level is. They are not going to be anywhere near your level in vocabulary. So be aware of that. And literally, okay, back to my second grade math fiasco. Juliana was in that class, by the way. That's when this happened. And that was a while ago. Okay, Valerie. So the students that you know, some of them were in my primary math class. So maybe I should apologize to them. But I made a mistake in teaching rounding. And it was a big mistake because they didn't do rounding in first grade. This is second semester, second grade. I told them the rule was 5 or more, round up. No problem. 4 or less, round down. I changed that word to drop and add a 0. What did they do when I told them to round down? They did literally what I told them to do when I told them to round up. So let's take an example. Here's what I mean. Round to the nearest tens. I told them the rule. that if the next door neighbor, you have to be very specific which number, if the next door neighbor was 4 or less, you round down. So I got this. After all, if I had 376 and I'm rounding to the nearest tens, I'm rounding the 7 up. So rounding up means to go up, right? So rounding down must mean to go down. Well, I meant for them to go down to 70. Do you see how they literally did what I told them to do? Because that's what you did when you rounded up. You made the 7 and 8. So isn't it logical that if the teacher says to round down that you make the 7 a 6? Now that's totally, doesn't make any sense, does it? So I had to change my literal, how I worded my rule. And I had to tell them to drop and add a 0. So then I got drop the 2 and add a 0. It never dawned on me that they would go down to 6. Okay, so when you're teaching, you have to be aware of your terminology. Maybe Miss Mayville and Mrs. Brader especially, she's attuned to the smaller child, but I made a disaster. So I made a wrong impression, didn't I? And because of their immaturity, it was hard for me to undo that wrong impression. And I don't know if I could have caught that if I would have thought through the lesson more, but I didn't think about my terminology. Rounding down was not quite literal enough. They did it literally, and that's not at all what I meant. Do you see what I mean? So when you're teaching primary, you have to be aware of their immaturity. Be aware of the fact that they are going to take things quite literally, even though you didn't mean it that way. And be aware that they're going to hang on to those wrong first impressions. They're going to tend to remember how you showed them the first time the best. So you can't make a mistake. In 7th grade math, it's not as hard to go back and make a correction. You think, oh, I didn't really express that the right way. This gives the impression that you can do it this way. I can go back and clarify it relatively easy, though I still have a few students that still hang on to their wrong impression. But so terminology is going to be a lot more critical at primary than it is at regular elementary and intermediate. So make sure that you are aware of their immaturity. And then lastly, incorporate terminology into drill more than you do at upper levels. You will incorporate terminology into drill much more than you do at upper levels. That's going to be more part of your drill. Facts. We reviewed last time that facts are facts involve math information that is necessary to do your basic arithmetic computations. So these are your addition families. Do your first graders know them? No, they're taught some of them in kindergarten, but it's gone. Okay. Addition families and subtraction. The Becca curriculums does have their flashcards through 18, and it makes sense because that helps them to be able to borrow with 18 minus 9 and so forth. You never borrow with a 9, do you? But you have to borrow with an 8. That was the thinking behind going to 18. 12 is for multiplication, okay? And then you're going to have to drill. You will have to drill from the beginning the addition families. By the end of 2nd grade, they need to know the addition and subtraction families through 18, or they can't borrow or carry. Think about carrying. You have to be able to do 9 plus 9 is 18. That's why they did that. With primary math, the addition families are all based on the sum. In subtraction, the families are based on the minuend. Okay? Then next, multiplication tables are not drilled till basically end of second grade, beginning of third grade, so multiplication tables play a role at the end of primary math. However, instead of doing multiplication tables, we're going to be counting. At first I used to think, why does Mrs. Brader do all this counting in kindergarten? What's with all this counting by twos, counting by threes? Well, what is that? It's preparation for the times tables. What is reciting the 3 times tables? It's the same as counting by 3, isn't it? So counting is part of your drill. Your terminology, as I just mentioned, add in, sum, minuend, subtrahend, difference, that's going to be more a part of your drill than at upper grades. So, facts. You're going to be doing a lot more time and a lot more basics with your facts. So the last thing about the facts is that you will have to spend more time on drill at primary level, less and less as we get higher and higher up into junior high. In high school, we don't drill. I do not, sometimes I need to. Okay, but I don't drill in Algebra 1. 8th grade math I have from time to time, but only here and there. But math facts then, what's the goal? Automatic. Concept. The third step in the teaching progression is concept. What did we say about that? We said success is understanding. So what you need to know, first of all, is that primary math is concept driven because we are starting from the very beginning. It's concept driven. In 4th grade, 5th grade, when we're teaching addition, we're not teaching them that addition is when you, it's even hard for me to express it. This requires, of course, the use of manipulatives. Manipulatives. Okay, so you're explaining why. So at primary level, you are going to have to show them concepts with physical objects. That's what a manipulative is. And we will spend a couple class periods on what are they, how to use them, and practicing them. Because you'll have to teach, I mentioned subtraction. What does take away mean? You have to show them with physical objects that when I have 5 pencils in this hand and I take away 1, how many are left? 4. So you have to do a lot of manipulatives. So first thing we said is that primary math is concept driven. You are starting from scratch. And then you have to use manipulatives and a lot more technique, a lot more teaching methods than you have to do in 5th grade and 6th grade. Or even 4th grade. So you have to use techniques such as manipulatives to show them what addition really is, what subtraction really is, what multiplication really is. Okay, because it's not enough for them to know their addition facts and subtraction facts and times tables. They have to understand what they're actually doing. All right, and so you're going to use manipulatives. The other thing with this concept-driven idea is don't be afraid of story problems. It's kind of backwards. When you're in younger grades, you're going to do a lot more story problems because the children are familiar with that. And it kind of flips to the other side. They don't like the story problems in high school and junior high and 6th grade because they have to think. Whereas the younger students, you're going to use story problems, you're going to use everyday circumstances to teach concept because of the fact that you have to be very concept driven in primary grades. So you're going to use additional teaching techniques because of that, and those are primarily what we call manipulatives. Now, it doesn't mean you don't use them, but when you're teaching, there's the idea in teaching methodology that there's the concrete and the abstract, and in between we have the semi-concrete. Well, primary students cannot think in abstracts at all. Algebra's abstract, isn't it? They have to deal in concretes, and a lot of that will be with objects as a manipulative. Another way to have a concrete is when you're doing something in class. Second grade, to teach a lot about money. So what do you do in second grade? You have a classroom store, and you learn to buy and give change and all that stuff. That's kind of like doing story problems and manipulative at the same time. So you are going to be very concept driven. I personally think it's harder to teach first grade than fourth grade. Much harder. Or fifth and sixth grade. It's harder to teach third grade than fifth grade. It's harder to teach third grade than fourth grade. It's really hard to teach first grade. Why? The fact that you have to bring everything down to the concrete, the fact that they don't know their math facts, the fact that they take you literally, okay? I was really surprised about that. All right, so I have a much easier job teaching the high school students abstract concepts than Miss Mayville has and Mrs. Brader have with the first and second graders. So you have to really concentrate on teaching concept. It is the most important step of the teaching progression. Okay. Procedure. What did we say about procedure? We said one at a time, please. So procedure is a minor part of primary math. That doesn't have anything to do with one at a time, please. We'll get to that. But procedure is a much more minor part of primary math. Why? Are you going to show first graders 4 steps to doing something? They cannot do sequential problems. Did you know that? The other thing I found out is they're really bad about copying problems off the board. Okay, so I go into, when I taught second grade math that semester, it was an eye-opener. So I'm hoping to pass some of that on to you. I went from 9th grade Algebra 1, 5 minutes later, I'm down in the academy with the second graders. Big transition. And in my mind, I thought, this will be easy. This is second grade math. And I thought I could go in there, teach, get some experience, and it was a lot of work. It was very difficult for me. Okay, just in the students' maturity and in the concepts and so forth. I'm thinking to myself, just multiply, just add. And even the fact of the logistics of the classroom was completely different. What had I just been doing in algebra? I'd been doing problems on the board, and the students are writing the problem down, they're doing it with me. I'm having people come up to the board, and I'm reading the problem to them. I'm not even thinking twice about the fact that the second graders could not write down a problem that I verbalized to them. It took forever. I had to train them how to do that. I go in there and I'm teaching borrowing, so I tell them, okay, get out your paper. And they're all looking at me like, we only have our work page. They didn't write stuff down that I taught them. And I was like, okay, that's not how we teach second grade. We don't take notes and write down examples. We just work together on the board, and they just watch me. Because I wanted them to copy down a problem so that I could have somebody at the board and I could walk around and look at people doing it at their seats. I had a really hard time with that. They can't multitask, okay? So procedures, whether it's as a teaching technique, it's just a totally different idea. It took us, I don't remember details, but in my mind it was 10 minutes. It couldn't have been 10 minutes, but it was probably at least 5. I wanted them to put a subtraction paper, so I made them start bringing a piece of paper to class. And I had to teach them how to copy a problem off the board. They weren't lining up their numbers. And of course, drawing a line was like, and so forth. So, and then I know at the beginning of the year, Miss Mayville has to spend a lot of time just teaching them to write their assignment down, to put their papers where they go, to have the right book, to tear out their worksheet page. And so you have to really, really think about that. So your procedures are going to be fewer, and you're going to have to, when you do teach procedure, that's the second idea. You will have to spend time practicing procedures. I said at the beginning of this section that we said for procedures, one at a time, please. Well, that's an understatement at primary. You're going to have to not only do one thing at a time, you're going to have to spend time teaching them how to write it down. You're going to have to spend a lot more time on procedure, and even to the point where you are practicing specific routines. Okay? Because their first and second graders are still trying to learn the routine of school. The other problem I had with second grade math is that I had to go get the students, march them down the hallway, pencil box falls, ruler falls, trip over their feet. I was like, oh. Okay, so primary math is not going to be, I'm not very good at math, like at the end of last semester. So you're thinking, should I take intermediate math or should I take primary math? I'll tell you what I would have done, intermediate. So don't have the attitude that, I'm not good at math, I'll just do primary. There's nothing I'll just do about it, is there? So that's the thing to be aware of with all of our different progressions and so forth, that I used to tease people and say that children are not intelligent life forms until at least 12, okay? So anyways, when you're doing the teaching procedure and so forth, you've got to be aware of where they are. And I was really not prepared for the idea that they just couldn't do what I told them to do. So you're going to do less and less procedures. You're not going to be teaching these multi-step problems. You can't approach it that way either. You can't approach it as teaching them, okay, in fourth grade math, fifth grade math, by the time I'm doing seventh grade math and I'm teaching fractions, I tell them to get a common denominator, right? Adjust the numerator. Add the that's totally out of place in primary math. So, number 4, procedure, one at a time, please. That is an understatement. And you will be teaching less procedure and concentrating on basic concepts. But when you do teach procedure, you have got to be aware of what they can and cannot do, and you have to be aware that they are not multitaskers. They are not going to be able to do a several-step problem in a row. That's why they're not supposed to be able to do that. We're supposed to be setting the foundation of what is addition, not doing long column addition. Expansion, as we mentioned at the beginning, I'm not even going to talk about it. Very little expansion going on. We're concentrating on concept. Problem areas. Progression number 6 was problem areas. We have terminology, facts, concept, procedure, expansion. Skipping over that to problem areas. And we said the key with problem areas was don't avoid them. So, first thing about problem areas at the primary level is the fact that you are going to set the stage for their entire math, I'll use the word career. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're at the beginning. You are going to set the stage for their entire math schooling. Let's put it that way. You will actually determine if some of your students, quote unquote, like math. And so you are going to determine a lot of their future success. I think that's probably a better way to put it. Because you are teaching them their math facts. You are teaching them the foundational concepts of arithmetic. And so you have to be aware of that, and you have to realize that. So number 2, it's kind of, again, understatement. You can't avoid problem areas. You have to go back and reteach, reevaluate, change your methodology, because you are setting the foundation. And also in primary levels, you have more time to do games and keep it more active. Math should be your most active class of your day in first grade. And so you're going to start them out with the impression that math is fun, not math is hard. Okay? English is hard, spelling is hard, math is fun. Okay? I try to brainwash the 9th graders that Algebra 1 is much easier than pre-algebra, especially in Fairhaven Baptist Academy. Okay? So Math is fun. Math isn't hard. Now, obviously, we have to be in balance. We don't want free-for-all in math class. And I don't mean that, but math needs to be active. I mentioned the fact that they can't sit there like my high school students and copy the problem and work it together with me and the other students and on the board. They can't do that. So I have to multitask because they can't. So I have to have more than one student at the board. And then I have to be interacting with the other students. I have to be more active. I have to be more prepared. I have to be able to go one thing, the other, one thing, the other. I can't just say, okay, get out page such and start working on number 1, which I wouldn't do in high school either, but you understand the perspective. Then we talked about application. The last thing is, the last step of our teaching progression was application. Application is actually going to be easier because you're going to use application. That's our first point. Application will be easier because you're going to use it as a teaching technique, and they're going to be more familiar with it because it is concrete. So we have a different, in high school, you have to pull teeth to get them to like application. In first grade, it's such a part of every day that they don't even think about it. So it's a different perspective as well. Each one of these steps in our teaching progression comes in a totally different perspective. So as we're going through this semester, I want you to keep those things in mind.